the prairie changed its face after sundown. By day, it was a rolling ocean of grass and dust, endless and unforgiving. By night, it became something quieter, almost sacred-stitched together by moonlight, shadow, and the steady rhythm of a horse's hooves. Ethan Cole rode through that silence like he belonged to it. His freight wagon creaked softly behind him, its canvas-covered cargo bound for a settlement 2 days east. Dry goods, letters, medicine things, people waited for with hope and impatience. Ethan delivered them all under cover of darkness, not because he feared daylight, but because night suited him. The stars asked no questions. The dark didn't pry. He adjusted his coat against the cold and glanced ahead. There just as always stood the light. A single lantern glowed atop a tall wooden tower, rising from the plains like a solitary sentinel. Travelers called it the lighthouse of the plains, though there was no water for 100 miles. To Ethan, it was simply a marker that meant he was halfway through the loneliest stretch of his route. And tonight, for reasons he couldn't explain, his chest tightened at the sight of it. Margarette Hale trimmed the wick carefully, her fingers practiced, steady. The lantern's glow brightened, cutting a clearer path through the dark. From her perch high above the prairie, she scanned the horizon as she did every night. Wagon trains, lone riders, lost souls, anyone foolish or desperate enough to cross the plains after sunset depended on that light. She depended on it too. Margarette had been the keeper for nearly 3 years now. Ever since her father passed and left the Towerland, its responsibility to her. Some folks thought it strange, a woman alone on the plains, tending a lantern meant for strangers. Margarette thought it stranger to live without purpose. The sound reached her before the sight. The faint creak of wheels, the slow, steady cadence of a horse that knew its job well. A freight rider, she murmured. She leaned slightly over the railing, lantern light spilling down the tower's sides. Below, the dark shifted, and a wagon emerged from shadow into glow. The driver sat tall in the saddle, hat brim low, posture calm but alert. He rode like someone who trusted the night, but never underestimated it. Ethan felt it, then that familiar sensation of being seen. He tipped his hat automatically, though he couldn't yet make out the keeper's face. He'd passed this tower dozens of times, but rarely did he see more than a silhouette. Tonight, the light seemed stronger, warmer. Curiosity tugged at him. He slowed the horse, guiding the wagon closer to the base of the tower. He told himself it was to check the harness, to rest the horse. But when he looked up, he saw her clearly for the first time. Margarette stood framed by lantern glow, hair pinned neatly back, eyes sharp and watchful. Not afraid, not lonely, just present. "Well," she called down, her voice carrying easily through the still air. "You're right on time, freight rider." Ethan blinked, surprised despite himself. "Didn't know I was expected." She smiled faintly. "The night tells me things," that earned a quiet laugh from him. "Then it must have told you I'm grateful for the light." "That's why it's here," she said. "Most folks don't say thank you." He dismounted, boots hitting the dirt with a dull thud. "Most folks don't stop long enough to mean it." For a moment, neither spoke. The prairie stretched around them, endless and hushed, as if listening. Margarette descended the ladder slowly, lantern still burning above them. When she reached the ground, she stood a few paces away, studying him openly. "You ride these roads often," she said. "Often enough to notice when the light burns a little brighter than usual." Her smile deepened just a touch. "Then maybe," she replied, "the night wanted us to meet." Ethan looked at Horelli, looked and felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Two souls who belonged to the dark, standing in borrowed light, and neither of them realized just how much that light was about to change them both. Ethan stayed longer than he intended. The horse had settled, the wagon stood ready, yet neither of them moved to end the moment. Margarette leaned against the tower's wooden post, arms folded loosely, while Ethan stood nearby, hat in hand. feeling oddly exposed beneath her calm, assessing gaze. "You don't sleep much, do you?" she asked, breaking the silence. Ethan shrugged. "Sleep comes when it wants to. Nights are better for work." Margarette nodded as if that answer confirmed something she already knew. "That's what my father used to say. He believed night stripped people down to their truest selves." "And what do you believe?" Ethan asked. She tilted her head, considering. "I believe some people shine brighter after dark." The words lingered between them. Ethan cleared his throat, uncomfortable with how seen he suddenly felt. "You ever get lonely out here?" It was the question everyone asked. Eventually, Margarette didn't bristle. She didn't rush to answer either. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But lonely isn't the same as empty. This light," she gestured upward, "it gives me something to guard, something steady." Ethan understood that more than he expected. "I ride for the same reason. Keeps my hands busy. Keeps my mind from wandering where it shouldn't." Margarette studied him again, this time softer. "What are you running from, Ethan Cole?" He stiffened slightly. Few people used his full name. Fewer still spoke it like it mattered. "Nothing," he said too quickly, then sighed. "Or maybe nothing I can outride." The wind swept across the plains, carrying the distant howl of a coyote. Margarette wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You can warm yourself inside if you like," she offered. "I've got coffee, strong enough to wake the dead." Ethan hesitated. Freight riders learned early not to linger, not to build attachments that slowed them down. But the thought of leaving now felt wrong. Coffee sounds just about right. Inside the tower, the space was small but orderly. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with journals, spare wicks, and tools. A narrow cot rested in one corner, and a pot simmered over a modest stove. Margarette poured 2 tin cups and handed one to him. Their fingers brushed, and Ethan felt the contact like a spark. "Careful," she said lightly. "It's hot." "Seems fitting," he replied. They sat on opposite stools, steam rising between them. The lantern's glow filtered down through the floorboards above, casting warm patterns on the walls. "How did you end up riding freight at night?" Margarette asked. Ethan stared into his cup. "Used to ride with a partner. Day routes, mostly. We trusted the wrong people, took the wrong job." His jaw tightened. He didn't make it. Margarette didn't interrupt. She waited. "I switched 2 nights after that," he continued. "Fewer ambushes, fewer memories." "I'm sorry," she said quietly. He met her eyes. "Thank you." She took a breath of her own. "My father died during a storm. Lightning struck the tower while he was tending the light. Folks said it was bad luck, keeping a lantern where it didn't belong." "But you stayed," Ethan said. "Yes," she replied firmly. "Because if one traveler finds their way home because of this light, then it belongs." Something in her conviction stirred him. "You ever think of leaving?" Margarette smiled sadly. "Every now and then, but then night falls, and I remember why I'm here." They finished their coffee in companionable silence. Outside, the stars burned bright, indifferent, and eternal. Ethan stood first. "I should go. Dawn comes faster than it looks." Margarette walked him to the door. "You'll be passing through again." It wasn't a question. "I will," he said. "If the light's still burning, it will be," she promised. As he mounted his horse and guided the wagon back into the dark, Ethan glanced over his shoulder. Margarette stood in the doorway, lantern glow outlining her figure. For the first time in years, the night felt less empty. And Margarette, watching him disappear into the starlit plains, the tower no longer felt quite so solitary. To night souls, drawn closer by shared shadows, unaware that the darkness ahead would soon test the light they were beginning to kindle. The storm arrived without warning. Ethan sensed it hours before the first thunder rolled across the plains. The air grew heavy, pressing against his chest, and the stars vanished behind thick, boiling clouds. His horse snorted nervously, ears flicking back as the wind picked up speed. He urged the wagon forward, eyes straining through the dark. The lighthouse should have been visible by now, but the horizon remained black. A cold knot formed in Ethan's stomach. That light never failed. Not once in all his years riding this route. He pulled the reins tighter, scanning the distance. Then thunder cracked sharp and violent. "Easy," he murmured to the horse, though his own pulse quickened. The plains were unforgiving in storms like this. A broken wheel, a spooked animal, a wrong turn, any of it could mean disaster. Lightning split the sky, and for a heartbeat, Ethan saw it. The tower stood in silhouette, dark. "No," he breathed. He drove the horse harder, wagon jolting behind him as rain began to fall in heavy sheets. Wind tore at his coat, and thunder boomed so close it rattled his teeth. Inside the tower, Margarette fought the wind. The lantern sputtered violently as rain forced its way through the seams of the tower. She had already trimmed the wick twice, adjusted the glass, checked the oil butt. The flame danced wildly, weakening with every gust. "Hold on," she whispered, shielding it with her body. Another blast of wind roared through the structure, and the flame went out. Darkness swallowed the tower. Margarette froze, heart pounding. She struck a match with trembling fingers, but the wind snuffed it out instantly. Rain soaked her hair, plastering it to her face. This was her worst fear, the one she never voiced. A final gust slammed against the tower, and the lantern toppled, shattering against the floor. Margarette cried out as glass exploded around her. She stumbled backward, losing her footing, and pain flared as she struck her shoulder against the wall. Outside, Ethan saw the moment the light died. He didn't think, he reacted. Leaving the wagon behind, he mounted bareback and drove the horse toward the tower, rain stinging his face like needles. The wind howled, trying to tear him from the saddle. "Margarette," he shouted into the storm, though he knew she couldn't hear him. He reached the tower, just as another lightning strike illuminated the sky. He tied the horse quickly and rushed inside. Margarette. She was on the floor, clutching her shoulder, eyes wide but focused. Relief flooded her face when she saw him. "Ethan," she breathed. The light went out. "I know," he said, kneeling beside her. "Are you hurt?" "Just shaken," she replied, though pain crept into her voice. He examined her shoulder gently. "It's bruised, maybe worse. Can you stand?" She nodded, jaw set. With his help, she rose, leaning heavily against him as thunder shook the tower again. "We need to get that light back on," she said. "Someone could be out there." Ethan met her gaze, admiration cutting through his fear. "Then we'll do it together." They worked quickly. Ethan braced the ladder while Margarette fetched spare oil and a backup lantern. The wind still screamed, but inside the tower they carved out a pocket of determination. Hands shaking, Margarette struck another match. This time, Ethan cupped his palms around it, shielding the fragile flame. It caught. She lit the lantern, and warm light bloomed once more. Together, they hauled it back into place. Ethan climbed with steady resolve, while Margarette guided from below, calling out instructions. When the lantern finally shone again, cutting through rain and darkness, both of them sagged with relief. Ethan descended the ladder slowly. Lights back. Margarette exhaled shakily. "Thank you." Their eyes met, and in that moment, drenched, exhausted, hearts pounding, the world narrowed to just the two of them. "You didn't have to come," she said softly. "Yes," he replied. "I did." Thunder rolled in the distance, but its threat was fading. Ethan slipped off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "Stay warm," he said. She held the coat closed, breathing in the scent of rain and leather. "You're not leaving tonight." It wasn't a command. It was certainty. Ethan nodded. "I'm not." As the storm slowly loosened its grip on the plains, the light stood firm once more, and so did the bond between the freight rider and the keeper, tested by darkness, strengthened by the choice to stand together when the night was at its fiercest. The storm passed just before dawn. Rain softened to a mist, and the thunder retreated to distant murmurs beyond the plains. Inside the tower, silence settled in, thick, gentle, and heavy, with everything that had not yet been said. Margarette sat on the edge of the cot, Ethan's coat still wrapped around her shoulders. Her shoulder throbbed dully, but she hardly noticed. Ethan stood nearby, tending the stove, his movements careful, as though sudden motion might break the fragile peace between them. "You should rest," he said, "at least until the sun's fully up." She smiled faintly. Hard to sleep when the night finally lets go. He understood that. Dawn's always felt like a trespasser to me. Margarette studied him. "Funny, most folks welcome it. Most folks don't belong to the dark." She rose slowly, wincing just a little. Ethan noticed and stepped closer, steadying her without thinking. His hand lingered at her elbow, warm and sure. "You stayed," she said quietly. "I wasn't going to ride out while the light was in danger," he replied. "That's not the only reason." He didn't deny it. They stepped outside together as the sky began to pale. The plains looked different in early light, softened, less severe, as though the land itself were catching its breath. Margarette leaned against the railing of the tower's base. "When my father died, I promised myself I wouldn't need anyone out here, that the light would be enough." "And is it?" Ethan asked gently. She considered. "It was until you." His chest tightened. "I didn't mean to complicate things." "You didn't," she said, meeting his eyes. "You clarified them." Ethan let out a slow breath. "I've spent years riding from one delivery to the next, telling myself that staying moving meant staying alive. But last night," he paused. "Last night, the only thing that mattered was getting back here." Margarette reached for his hand, her fingers sliding into his, like it had always been meant to happen. "Then maybe the night didn't bring you here by accident." They stood that way as the sun crested the horizon, light spilling across the plains. For the first time, the lighthouse of the plains was bathed in daylight. It didn't seem diminished by it. Ethan smiled softly. "I don't want to just pass through anymore." Margarette's breath caught. "You're a freight rider. I can change my route," he said. "Or my reasons." She searched his face, weighing the truth in his words. "I can't leave the light." "I wouldn't ask you to," he replied. "Somebody has to keep it burning. I'd just like to be close enough to see it every night." Tears stung her eyes, unbidden. "You'd give up the road." "I'd give up running," he said. The honesty of it left her trembling. She stepped closer, resting her forehead against his chest. Ethan wrapped his arms around her, holding her like something precious and rare. "This place doesn't scare you?" she asked. "It does," he admitted. "But not as much as the thought of never coming back." They kissed, then slow, tentative, filled with promise rather than urgency. The plains watched in silence, as if approving the union of two souls who had finally stopped wandering alone. When they parted, Margarette smiled through her tears. "I suppose you'll need somewhere to stay." Ethan laughed softly. "I reckon I will." The wagon still waited in the distance, his unfinished delivery calling to him. But for the first time, the road didn't feel endless. As daylight claimed the land, the night loosened its hold on them both, not as something lost, but as something transformed. Two shadows, learning how to stand in the light together without losing who they were. And somewhere deep inside, both Margarette and Ethan knew that when night fell again, they would face it not alone, but side by side. Ethan finished the last of his freight run 3 weeks later. He returned at dusk, wagon lighter, heart steadier than it had ever been. The plains welcomed him with a familiar hush, the sky painted in deep blues and golds as the sun dipped low. And there it was, the lighthouse of the plains, its lantern already glowing, steady and sure. Margarette watched him approach, from above her shoulder healed, her spirit lighter. She had learned his rhythm now, the way his horse moved, the way his presence seemed to settle the night itself. When he reached the tower, she descended the ladder with a smile that reached her eyes. "You're back earlier than expected," she said. "I rode faster," he replied. "Turns out I had somewhere worth returning to." She laughed softly, the sound warming the cool air. "Did the road release you so easily?" "It tried not to," Ethan said. "But I told it I'd found my anchor." They walked together beneath the tower, lantern light pooling around their boots. The plains stretched endlessly in every direction, but for once the vastness felt comforting rather than isolating. "I spoke with the settlement council," Ethan continued. "They've agreed I can handle day deliveries between here and the east routes. Nights," he looked at her, hope flickering. Nights are mine again. You'll have me. Margarette took his hands. I never wanted to keep the light alone. The wind stirred the grass, whispering through the plains like a blessing. Overhead, stars began to appear, one by one. Life settled into a rhythm. After that, by day, Ethan rode short routes, repairing wagons and helping travelers prepare for the long crossings. By night, he returned to the tower, sometimes carrying letters meant for Margarette. Sometimes nothing more than stories from the road. Margarette kept the light burning, as she always had, but now she did so with the knowledge that someone watched it, not just as a guide, but as a promise. They spoke often of the past, but it no longer haunted them. Ethan's guilt softened with time, eased by purpose. Margarette's grief found room to breathe, no longer locked inside the tower's walls. One evening, as the moon climbed high, Ethan stood beside her at the railing. "You ever think about how strange it is," he said. "A freight rider and a keeper of a light in the middle of nowhere." Margarette smiled. "The night has a sense of humor." He turned to her, serious now. "I spent years believing light was something you chased, something always just ahead of you." He gestured to the lantern. "You taught me it's something you tend." She reached up, touching his cheek. "And you taught me it's something worth sharing." They kissed beneath the lantern's glow, the plains stretching endlessly around them. Somewhere in the distance, a wagon creaked, guided safely by the light above. The lighthouse of the plains became more than a marker on the horizon. It became a meeting place. A story travelers carried with them, a freight rider who chose stillness, and a keeper who chose love without abandoning her duty. Two night souls who found their light not by escaping the dark, but by standing in it together. And, as the lantern burned steady against the vast western sky, their story settled into the land itself, quiet, enduring, and true. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.